Hello everyone and welcome to this breakout session about European Neighbourhood Policy. Vadis, European Neighbourhood. Vadis, for those of you who are not well versed in Latin, is whither or where do you go, European Neighbourhood. And for the last 90 minutes, hint that I used 90 minutes in these World Cup times, we're going to try to figure out where the European Neighbourhood is going. You might remember when the European Neighbourhood Policy was launched that the sort of goal about it was to create a ring of stability, a ring of prosperity, and dare I say perhaps also a ring of democracy around the European Union. I think it's quite fair to say that it really hasn't worked out that way. It was the Arab Spring, we have the wars in Ukraine, wars in Syria, big problems with migration, sliding of democratic process in many of the European neighbourhood countries. So what we're going to try to hope to figure out in the next 90 minutes or so is the European neighbourhood policy attractive enough? Does it need a new impetus? Can we learn something from perhaps the European enlargement process? And how do we deal with external actors who might have another idea of their neighbourhood that happens to be the European neighbourhood as well? My name is Richard Josviak. I'm the RFE RLL, Radio Free Europe correspondent from Brussels. I've covered this topic for pretty much my whole professional career. It's not very long, but it's good enough to have an idea about it. But with me, I have three eminent guests that know a lot about this topic, starting with the ladies, and the lady in the middle, the lady in white, Madame Sonja Lokar, Slovenian MP, sociologist, but more than anything, very known internationally as a gender rights expert, women's rights expert, who has seen the European neighbourhood policy both from the outside and the inside. We have Daniela Morar, to the left of Sonja. She's the State Secretary for European Integration from Moldova. She is a career diplomat who's been dealing with Moldova's relationship to the EU her whole career, pretty much. She was part of the negotiation team for the EU-Moldova Association Agreement, and she was also coordinating and overseeing the visa liberalization process for Moldova. So both the association agreement and visa lib, the two crown jewels when it comes to European neighbourhood policy, I would say. And last and not least, we have Monsieur Pierre Morel, lecturer at Sciences Po in Paris, used to be a French diplomat in Egypt, but most of your career you spent in the European Commission, 23 years dealing with European neighbourhood and enlargement, and very familiar actually with this part of Europe because you were part of the teams negotiating the enlargement in 2004 and 2007, and later also very involved in the Western Balkans.
With good memory of that time.
Yes, very good. Before we start, I want to refer to Slido, which is a way for you to ask questions. I will, of course, give the microphone to you as well, but you can also send in questions. And you go basically to www.sli.do. You enter the code, which you see there. It's PES 2018, and you type your question. And you have to remember now that since there's another session going, you have to type in, or you have to choose the Imperial Room. And you can memorize that by thinking about the panel and the name of the panel, which is Vadis, and that was dealing with, it's a very good book about the times of Emperor Nero during the Roman times. So, Imperial Room, remember that. Let's kick off now. Mr. Mirel, I personally think that we don't need a European neighbourhood policy. I don't think it's functioning very well. I believe that you have either an EU enlargement policy, like you see right now in the Western Balkans, or you have EU foreign policy. There's no need for a neighbourhood policy. Convince me that I'm wrong.
Well, if I would take up your last word, like with the Western Balkans, it doesn't work with the Western Balkans. For 15 years, the EU has promised European perspective, and the countries, no country, except until recently, some of them, have really been brave enough to take the necessary decisions to reform in order to fulfill the criteria one day. So I'll put that aside, question of Western Balkans. For me, there's no doubt that the classical foreign policy cannot answer the challenges that the EU is facing with its neighbors. Let me mention just three: security, migrations, and we often forget economy and trade. If there are no special, let's say, trade relations, no special trade agreements with neighbors, then you can expect other powers, starting with China in the first place, that would very quickly take up market shares that until now have been, through the bilateral agreements, maybe taken more by EU companies. So I think there is a need definitely for neighborhood policy, based first and foremost on our own interest. And here I'm going to make a provocative remark. We need to deal with the countries as they are and not as we would wish them to be. Let's take Egypt, authoritarian regime. Can we say we don't deal with Egypt because it's an authoritarian regime, becoming like Mubarak and etc., and therefore our values are not shared? And no, we can't. We can't. We have to deal with that country because that's the people who are in power, and we have an interest, again, migration and the rest of it. The mistake that was made right from the start was to sell it as a grand new policy. There was a Barcelona process with countries in the south. That was a kind of neighborhood policy, ad hoc, with tailor-made agreement country by country. And please, you cannot say that the situation in Syria or in Libya is because the neighborhood policy failed. There are other reasons, obviously, because of the invasion in Iraq, because of the decisions of French and Brits to eliminate Gaddafi, but it has nothing to do with neighborhood policy. And regarding the South, before I maybe come to the question of Eastern Partnership, I think no neighborhood policy, even the best neighborhood policy, would have ever been able to solve three key issues that Southern countries have not been able to solve for 60, 70 years. One, the failure of their own modernization of society and economy in the 60s, Gamal Abdel Nasser and these guys. Second, the opposition between secularism and a system based on faith, rule-based, political system. And the third one, although it concerns only Lebanon and Syria, the opposition between Shiite and Sunni Muslims. Whatever the policy, even the best one, would not have been, and therefore, coming back to the question of what kind of policy, a policy cannot be defined whether enlargement or whether neighborhood unless it is fully shared by the political elite, by the business community, and by the society at large in the country. If that does not exist, well, you can forget whether enlargement or neighborhood policy, because you don't deal through action plans. In particular, in the first sort of conception of neighborhood policy, of action plans that should fit all the countries. So the revised neighborhood policy, in my view, which is more ad hoc, tailor-made, is much better. Because it more, I think, corresponds to the real need, is more shared with the willingness and readiness of the countries to implement it. Now, looking at the East, again, I'm going to make a provocative remark here. I think the association agreement, I'm sorry for my remark, the association agreements with the deep, comprehensive free trade agreement that were signed, that was maybe a mistake. Because we ignored, in doing that, we ignored two things. First, we ignored geopolitics completely. Second, these are very complex agreements that, for the time being, none of the three countries, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, is really in a position to implement. Of course, there are elements which are being implemented, but these are very, very far-reaching agreements that, if implemented, would basically bring the countries to the door of the EU in a situation like Norway. It's internal market plus some other policies around. Anyway, that's the situation now. It has to be implemented now, but I think the Eastern Partnership do correspond now to more than before to the needs of the countries. Then you made another remark, if I may, although there will be, I'm sure, a discussion on that, how to deal with external actors. Very difficult in the south because countries are divided, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iran, or weak, Arab League. So it's extremely difficult. I don't know how it can be done. In the East, again, maybe a provocative remark, I think it's high time to open a dialogue with Russia. We have objective interest, security, energy. Russia, we're not depending on Russia on energy. Russia is depending on the EU more than we are depending on it. So, security, energy, trade, we have objective interest. And we should sit together with the objective of what? Of reaching a continental free trade area. That was the initial idea of Gorbachev a long time ago. Trade is the best way to reconcile people. And if trust is created through trade discussions, and there are many trade irritants with Russia, anti-dumping duty, or what have you, from there, creating some trust, then one could move to more sensitive issues. Such a deal cannot be opened unless Russia would do some move on Donbass. Fine, but that can be, negotiated. I stop here for the time being.
It was quite controversial, huh? I think. I saw some people in the audience turning a bit, especially when you were mentioning the Eastern Partnership components, and I will ask you about that a bit. I mean, what I usually hear from the European Commission is that the DCFTA with Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, they are the crown jewel of the European Neighbourhood Policy. This is what we want to have. And now you're saying something completely opposite. How did you come to that?
No, wait a minute. I'm saying that it may have been a right mistake at that time for geopolitical reasons that were completely ignored, and for the complexity of the agreement. I personally think that we should have aimed at the type of agreement that was signed with the Czech Republic back in 92 or 3, or with Poland, or with Serbia, etc. That is free trade agreement, right? Preferential free trade, with a clause that allows the agreement to be expanded and to, over the years, when there is a capacity to implement, when you can convince some external actors that it's not directed against them, that it can be more easily moving into different fields. At the end of the day, you would achieve probably the DCFTA, but in a different way. And look now, the EU has proposed the same type of agreement to Morocco and Tunisia since, 5 years? They have not said yes, they have not said no, they said it doesn't fit our situation, our current economic situation. So unlike Eastern countries, they have not accepted just like that. They are discussing some elements would be welcome and positive, some others may actually destroy their emerging, not industries that much, but services. So, this is also a different attitude and lessons learned.
The other thing I want to pick a bit, which is also controversial, is the need to have a dialogue with Russia. I hear that very often in Brussels as well. Mr. Juncker is usually saying that. But then again, okay, the EU doesn't have its regular EU-Russia summit anymore, but the dialogue is there. It's there in G20, it's there in the Council of Europe, it's there in the OSCE. What is there to talk about, really? I mean, you talk about a free trade area, but you see that Russia is probably the biggest sinner in the WTO anyway. So yes, a conversation, but about what? What's the point of having a conversation about a conversation?
Well, to start on very concrete issues, trade issues. There are, I think, on the EU side, 4 or 5 anti-dumping duties. On the Russian side, 3 or 4, which have been sort of, counter-reaction. One should start with that. Then you have the so-called Gazprom regulation, as it is called, directive on energy, which is almost dealt with. I mean, since a couple of weeks there have been discussions. These are the kind of things to be discussed. And from there, moving, very concrete things. You need to create some confidence. And then moving on to look at how to make compatible the Eurasian economic area with the EU. There are probably ways. What does that imply to one day reach, if not a big FTA for the time being, but at least in some sectors to move forward? Otherwise, what is going to happen? That's China that is going to eat up the markets. And even Russia these days is a bit afraid of what China is doing, in particular through the Silk Road.
Thank you, Mr. Morel. Madame Lokar. Often I hear from EU officials that, when it comes to European neighbourhood, there is one untapped potential, and that's women. They are the ones who can really, really, really change the European neighbourhood, both in the south and the east. But how to untap this potential? That's the question.
This is a very interesting question, because I think that dealing with gender equality is one of the successes of the European Union in the Balkans, because this was one of the fields where European Union did what it should do anywhere in the neighborhood policy. It was looking for the mutual interest. It was looking for real actors who can change the things. It let the countries and the activists there to form their own strategy, how they want to do things. And if you look at this region now and you compare it with the beginnings in the times of the Stability Pact when it was established, you can see a very big change. For example, the average of women in the parliaments in the beginning of the century was 7%. Today it's over 27%. And these countries, all of them have legislative quota rules for women in the parliaments. In the governments, more and more women are present as ministers. We had even some women prime ministers. This never happened before. So this is one thing which changed, but it is not the only one. There is a huge improvement, I think, with regard to violence against women, in the sense that the legislative framework completely changed, that the societies understood that the violence against women is not a private thing, but it is a very important societal issue which has a very hard ramifications in economy and health in very different fields. But the major thing didn't really work. I think that the approach of the European Union to the Balkans was wrong in the sense that it has put too much accent on privatization, market economy, balanced budget, things which are written in Maastricht Treaty, but not the same amount of energy and work on economic and social rights of the people. And if you think about this region where people were used to have free of charge, universal health care, very good child care, education, care for elderly, and now with the wars which were there, they are practically robbed of everything. And they expect from the cooperation with the European Union and from the accession agreement that they will get back their normal life, and this didn't happen. So I think that the sentiment towards European Union is changing because of this fact. And it's changing very much, and as the Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina said before, there are other alternatives and other offers which are coming in a different way than European Union's ones. But for the elites in these countries, they might be more easier to accept. So we have a serious problem.
But, okay, you say that there are other alternatives. I assume you're alluding to Turkey, I assume you're alluding to
Not
Russia, to China possibly.
Everybody.
But are they really alternatives though? Geographically speaking, economically speaking, can they deliver the thing that you said that the EU could not, economic and social rights for people?
But nobody is delivering it. And these other competitors for the attention of the cooperation in the region, they are coming with the offers which are not bound to human rights, which are not bound to LGBT rights, which are not bound to democracy, freedom of media, etc., etc. And for young democracies with autocratic inclinations, this is perfect. Perfect. And the situation for the people is either better than if they try to join and cannot join European Union, and even if they join, what they are offered is the same very poor, very uncertain life which they already have.
Can I, actually, I'm going to break with tradition. Pierre, can you answer to this? Because this is sort of like you dealt with Western Balkans as well towards the end of your career in DG enlargement. And when you hear this sort of criticism, Commission focused too much on market economy, privatization, etc., and failed to, to uphold the whole thing about the economic and social rights. What do you think about that? Because you were involved in this.
I do not agree.
No, never mind.
The IMF did. That was left to the IMF.
Yes.
Economic reforms and everything is left traditionally by the EU to more the IMF and the World Bank. What the EU has done, has put really the emphasis on, was rule of law. And I mean, there have been so many programs and projects and what have you in the countries. The results so far can be discussed. But I think that was really the emphasis. Plus, since now 4 years, the so-called connectivity agenda, putting much more funding into networks, transport, energy, and so on, which was confirmed in Sofia recently by the EU leaders together with the Balkans. So that was more of that aspect. On the social aspect, I agree with you, because the EU does not have any social policy. And even when it tries to revise the directive to make sure that workers from Central Europe would be paid the same salary as the West, there are some countries that oppose. I don't want to name any. So, it's very hard to sell a social policy that you don't have.
I know.
And that's one of the issues. But where I fully agree with Sonja is the importance of investing into youth and women. And since we talked about the Southern policy, if you look at Tunisia, why is it that Tunisia today is different than the other countries? Because 60, 70 years ago, the president, Bourguiba, started to put laws in place, civil code and everything, to ensure equality between women and men. The only case, only example in that region, plus education. These were the two priorities. And now,
plus family planning.
Yes.
Which is a totally different
So you see now
issue than Egypt.
The positive results of that investment for 50, 60 years. And when I said that the EU should deal primarily for its own interest and consider the countries as they are and not as we would wish them to be, it doesn't mean that we should hide our principles or values. I don't want to be misunderstood on that. But we should not come, as we did in the first years of the neighbourhood policy, with these action plans written for all the countries, with reform of judiciary, freedom of media, ABC sort of catalog, which did not work. So it has to be tailor-made, and again, it has to be shared and accepted by the local people. If it's not, you can forget. You can send your consultants or whoever. You will just be wasting money.
Daniela, you heard from Mr. Mirel about perhaps Moldova at the time wasn't ready for the DCFTA. It was not strategically geopolitically the correct thing. And you also heard possible idea about, you know, some big free trade agreement covering the whole continent. What is your point on that? First of all, from Moldova's point of view on these two things.
On the DCFTAs, first of all, it was our own decision to take the maximum what we could in terms of negotiations of the association agreement. And also now, the DCFTA is the only part that its implementation talks by itself, by the data and the numbers. We have 65% of our trade goes to EU after 4 years of implementation. And I think one important data also to share is that 60% of the trade from the Transnistrian region also goes to EU. And this is one of the most powerful also element to reintegrate and as a confidence building measure inside the country, where indirectly the Transnistrian companies are complying with the EU standards, labeling and all that in order to be able to export to EU. I agree with the element of geopolitical kind of context that could be taken care more carefully at that time, and also I think it's an element which is still important to be kept in mind, and also when dealing with our region entirely, and also with every country specific. And it's not only linked with the DCFTA, but with the entire context. I think geopolitical part, it's very important.
And when it comes to Moldova right now, you have Visa Lib, you have the association agreement with the DCFTA. If I could turn to the title of this debate, Quo Vadis European Neighbourhood Policy, if I can add Quo Vadis Moldova, where will you going to go now?
I fully agree with what was said before, that it's very important to have the clear understanding of reality. To deal with the countries as they are, as it was said, and also to understand reality in itself, in EU, in our kind of neighborhood generally. And before answering to this question, I think it's first of all to understand clear where we are and what kind of race or where we would like to go. And I think this is the most important, in a way, element before answering to the question. And indeed, when to look where we are, and we always try to look at the Eastern Partnership, at the neighborhood policy as pragmatic and as realistic as possible. It's true that we're not starting the road from scratches. It's already kind of a lot of substance into that. We kind of implementing our association agreements, the visa liberalization already 4 years being implemented. We have 1.5 million of citizens already benefited of it. And for a country of almost 3 million, it's very important in terms of a concrete deliverable. Also, we had a quite in a way result-oriented summit of Eastern Partnership, where we have these 20 deliverables by 2020. Now the question in terms of where we would like to go, as we're all kind of looking at the European integration as a long race, we could maybe compare with the marathon, and here it's very important not the distance also, but also the target, the final goal. And for the Republic of Moldova, it's very clear in terms of the goal, what we would like in a way to reach, and also to be able to answer to the Quo Vadis in terms of practical terms. I think also in the marathon, it's important the motivation along the line, because this is usually the killing factor, the people are renouncing to the effort in itself, and the daily training, which means do the work, the proper implementation. And I personally believe in this planting the seed in different sectors and different elements, which will create this bond of irreversibility, practically. And this is what we're trying to do back home in terms of trying to find realistically, besides the first of all, is the implementation of what we have on the plate for the association agreement, and with this it will prepare us to be closer and to have this in a way strengthen the cooperation and better in a way links, and as we call it, irreversible in a course. Also, it's important find additional elements beyond the association agreement, and here the experience of the Western Balkans is very relevant for us, and for us it's important to see intermediary tools, elements and platforms, how we can in a way build it in very realistic terms. And the support from European Union and Member States, it's crucial, and if here to refer to the now, which is undergoing the negotiations of the future multi-annual financial framework, it's very important to keep still priority for the instruments for the neighborhood and also necessary resources and support. And I think also it's very important for the Quo Vadis also this political attention that the new Commission will give to the entire region. I think this is very important to answer to the question Quo Vadis and how we'll move kind of step by step for the intermediary period of time.
But do I get it that the goal at the very end, it's EU membership?
Definitely, yes.
And okay, you talked about a marathon. A marathon is 42 kilometers. How many kilometers have you run to that goal so far?
Next year we'll have 10 years of Eastern Partnership. And I think if to do a comparison in the life of a human being, the middle age crisis, I think it's 40 or something to that. I think when it comes to the policy, it's close to 10. And this is why it's very important also answering to the Quo Vadis question, also to see what the Eastern Partnership as an instrument and the policy also as a substance, what we in a way could do together more and also for the future. And as I said, it's not about the distance and kilometers in itself, it's about the reaching the goal and not to lose the speed. And to be on the process. Because for us, the European integration is the best recipe to modernize the country and the best way to transform. And this was the driving force also of entering into the negotiations of association agreement. It was not first, which is very important for the economy also to export to EU, but the first, if to look on the surveys at that time, it was the people wanted to ensure to have good quality of products back home. And for us in this race, it's important this. But definitely also as it proved for the last wave of enlargement and also for the Western Balkans, it's very difficult to push these very difficult reforms in this geopolitical, still kind of shaky environment, these heavy reforms without seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
It's a very diplomatic answer. Anyway, we're going to soon open up the room for questions, but there's one here I want you all to answer, because that sort of is perhaps what the neighborhood is missing a bit, and it's the one here that says, how can the ENP be effective in importing the enlargement logic if it cannot offer the golden carrot of accession to partner countries? This is something you hear quite often, that you need the light at the end of the tunnel, otherwise these countries will not reform. I start with you, Pierre, but I will ask the ladies as well. Do we need a golden carrot or the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, if we go back to the DCFTA, for me that's already, if not a golden carrot, at least a silver one. It's really a far-reaching agreement that again would bring the countries very close to EU door, almost in the position that Norway is having today with the EU. So that's already quite an ambitious, difficult objective for the countries before considering enlargement. Next week there will be European Council in Brussels with a question to the leaders. Will they accept to open or not accession negotiations with Albania and Macedonia? Some of these member states may say no. There may not be unanimity. So if 15 years after giving a perspective to Western Balkans, 27 years after a stupid fight between Greece and Macedonia on the name issue, now solved, if ratified.
If solved.
With a major reform of the judiciary in Albania that no other country has ever undertaken, vetting magistrates, which means basically half of them will not be judge or prosecutors anymore because they made money in obscure manners. Despite all these efforts, despite all the speeches and promises, the European Council may not be in a position to say yes to open accession negotiations, not to close. So, can you see in these conditions, the European Council saying, we promise, we give you Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia to keep these three countries a European perspective? No leader is going to do that, except Poland, Sweden, and maybe the Czech and Slovak. So that's, you would just kill the EU body in doing that. It's maybe a very long-term perspective, but I would say that the country should first and foremost start implementing these very far-reaching agreements.
Sorry that I'm coming back to you, but I can't miss this opportunity. You mentioned the European Council next week in Brussels, where they might take a decision on opening accession negotiations with Macedonia and Albania. And you said that the Council might not want that. I know you're not representing the French government, but you are French, and we know that the big country that is very much sort of not really happy about this, the one country that is pushing against this, is in fact France. Why is that, you think?
Oh, it was explained very clearly by President Macron in Sofia. He said very openly, I don't want to discuss enlargement, promises, perspective is there, etc., but I don't want to discuss enlargement in concrete terms before the EU is able to reform itself, in particular, what he mentioned, Eurozone question.
Do you agree with him?
I think the two can go in parallel. I don't see why one should precede the other. In particular, if you're only talking about opening accession negotiations, which countries that may join, God knows when.
Madame Lokar.
I see the connection between the reforms within the European Union and the strategy how to deal with the neighborhood. I think that for 20 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, European Union was not sure what is really its essence. Is it a common market society, or is it an alternative to the way how modern world was run the last, let's say, 100 years maybe, and proposing, in fact, a different civilization, the civilization which is based on human rights, which is based on solidarity, which is based on green understanding of the planet and things like this. And I think that in these 20 years, the European Union oscillated between these two things and did a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And it was visible also in the neighborhood policy. But after the crisis in 2008, I think that European Union made a choice, a wrong choice, decided to be more about common market union, common market society, and left somehow out this alternative. And today, I think the mistake was so big that we are now confronted with the consequences. Whatever is happening are consequences of this decision. The Brexit, the rise of right-wing extremism, Euroscepticism, this feeling of instability and fear of the people who do not feel anymore Europe as a continent of hope for everybody. And I think that now Europe has not anymore these two choices. Either it will take over and become the alternative, or it will become a non-player in the global environment and will not have really effective neighboring policy, because the other players will take it over, and even more, it will transform Europe itself into a neighborhood where they deal with their issues and treat it as a non-actor. This is, for me, a serious danger.
You want to respond?
Or it will combine both. Europe à la carte, Europe of circles.
Yeah.
Why not?
But Madame Lokar, golden carrot necessary, or is it enough with silver carrots for the European?
Sorry?
Golden carrots, is it necessary? EU membership perspective, or is it enough with the famous silver carrots?
I think that if you ask me this question before the crisis in 2008, I would say absolutely golden carrot, necessary and will work as a magnet. But in the Balkans, when people are looking into the European Union and see the problems they have, the way how they react, how they solve or not solve their own issues, they don't believe anymore that the carrots are real. They think more about what is the hidden agenda. Maybe they want something else. They want our market, they want our very cheap working force, they want our clever young people who will emigrate and leave this country totally devastated, brain drained. And this is not in our interest. So why European Union has to be really ready to these questions, which maybe the elite is not posing, but the ordinary people are thinking like this. And they want the answers, serious answers, not just words which say something and deeds which do something else.
Daniela, do you need a golden carrot? Or is it enough with the DCFTA and the silver carrot you already have?
I think the answer it's clear and it's evident for us, which we already declared, like the European integration, the main, in a way, priority for foreign and internal policy. This is why definitely it's important, it's necessary for all the aspects, for the political leadership, for the government in order to continue the difficult reforms, and for the society in general. At the same time, we're very realistic and pragmatic. We try in a way to understand the context. Even it's sometimes very frustrating. Frustrating from different reasons. I'm into this maybe not long enough, but for the a life of a person and also the process of a country from 14 years, and always when talking about Moldova and our region, it was difficult. It was crisis. It was very, in a way, complex situation from the side of EU, but nevertheless, EU moved ahead, like we saw countries joining, opening chapters, like still, even it's very difficult at all the moments, the process goes on, and the process, in a way, enhancing. And also is frustrating from the point of view, for example, Moldova is part of all the regional structures of the Western Balkans, like Central European Initiative, Southeast Cooperation Processes, RCC, and also if to compare the homework that we have, it's very, very similar, but in terms of instruments, it's very different. And for us, maybe the silver carrot for the intermediate period, it would be to have kind of facilities or framework that will help us, similar as in the case of the Western Balkans, to implement the necessary reforms and agenda that we have already committed, but also what is still ahead of us afterwards.
Thank you. Let's go to the audience now and open up this to a proper debate. A few housekeeping rules here. Please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, who you're working for, and tell us who you address the question to. And finally, please avoid grandstanding. We want a Q&A here. If you're going to express an opinion, think about the timing. We have 45 minutes, and I'm sure there are many people who want to ask stuff. We're also going to take slider questions. So the floor is open. Do we have any questions? The lady here in front. Microphone, please. Now we should. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Elita Kortenska from Leiden University. I've been following and researching enlargement, the effects of the previous enlargement, and the capacity of the European Union to actually accept new member states in the Western Balkans. And I'm absolutely intrigued by that idea of opening the dialogue with Russia, because in the Western Balkans, I think the influences of EU and Russia are kind of in tension right now. And I believe that a dialogue with Russia might indeed help both enlargement in the Western Balkans and also the security of the European Union itself. But I was wondering, and that's a question to Mr. Pierre Mirel, what do you think Russia would respond on such an idea for a dialogue with the EU, based on our common interests, to actually start one right about now?
Well, I think in the dialogue, what would Russia ask? I think Russia would ask, obviously, for lifting the sanctions. That's quite obvious. But also, I think Russia would be interested in a trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Area, because without Ukraine, that economic zone is almost nothing, right? Kazakhstan does that much to offer, Armenia neither. So that's really the interest. But you made a remark on the Western Balkans. I think we exaggerate the importance of the influence of Russia in the Western Balkans greatly. There are another post, Sergei Lavrov gave a very interesting interview a few weeks ago, not opposing at all to the countries joining the EU. And actually, Russia is investing to make sure that one day, when Serbia, for instance, will be in, they will have a good stake in the energy sector. No, what they're opposed to is joining NATO, Serbia and Macedonia. That's NATO, NATO, and NATO, not that much the EU. What's more worrying in the Balkans in terms of external influence is Turkey. Erdogan was in Sarajevo 10, 15 days ago, and a few weeks before, he made an incredible speech in Turkey in saying, I'm sorry for oppressed brothers in Skopje, Pristina, and Mostar. I mean, you know. And thirdly, what is also more worrying is certainly Islam radical groups, in particular in two countries in the Western Balkans, much more than Russia.
Before you follow up, can I just ask Sonja as well, since you are from the region, should we be less worried about Russia, more worried about Islamic radicalization, Turkey, etc. in the Western Balkans?
I agree with your comments on Russia. I think you are right on here. But with regard to Turkey, I think it's, as far as I know these countries, their problem is that culturally, the Islam in Bosnia, Islam in Albania, Islam in Kosovo, it's not a radical Islam. There are pockets, of course, because the war left these pockets there. But I don't believe that they are really...
The greatest number of fighters, according to population, are from Kosovo.
Yeah, but why?
No, but that's another question.
We are back to the question, because the social despair of Kosovo is so big that being a mercenary in the army somewhere in Syria is a super economic prospect. And this is what European Union, if wants to have a stable and peaceful environment, has to think about. How to develop these countries in a sense that they will give normal life to their people. It is connected, of course, also to the democracy in these countries and to the rule of law and to the ability to discuss their things as civilized democratic people. All of this is lacking. And this European Union can help really a lot to change.
If I may remark on Turkey to make the link with the previous panel, populism. One of the reasons why enlargement, it's very difficult for public opinion in most EU countries to discuss enlargement, or for the leaders actually to sell the idea of opening negotiations or whatever, it's because of Turkey. And the day when the EU will say, well, because everybody knows that it's over with Turkey, I mean, in terms of accession, come on, that the day it will be, made clear, it will be much easier to then convince public opinion that Serbia, Albania, etc., could join the EU. That's a very important point here.
Madam, you had one more little question?
Yes, I just want to kind of briefly mention that it used to be the same conversation about Russia, NATO, and the EU membership when the Central and Eastern Europe was entering was in the process of accession. So, but now there's some kind of a difference, and maybe I would agree with you that this is Turkey and a radicalization, because I don't believe that it's radical Islam alone, it's the radicalization in process, but I was wondering how can that be combated on a social level among citizens indeed, other than the economic conditions, because it's not only economic conditions, these are beliefs, religions, emotions, fears. So it's not simply economics that bring those people to Syria or to fight. You need some more as a motivation to actually put your life online. So I'm wondering what would be a solution to actually either rhetorically or maybe in some other way to combat those feelings on the ground in Western Balkans, because indeed there's quite a population with Islamic
Sonja,
population.
do you have some idea?
And thank you.
I think that in this sense, women really can be essential. For example, in this moment we have in Serbia a rather right-wing government. And this government has not been a champion of gender equality by its profile. But at the same time, we have in the parliament a cross-cutting women's network. And we have a women's platform for the development of Serbia, which is capable of pushing Serbia in the right, I would say, really European democratic direction. I don't think that this movement is strong enough to really make deep reforms, but what they can do, and they do it, they prevent that the gains which were already there are not lost. For example, the quota will not be curtailed, the abortion will not be banned, the NGOs dealing with human rights will not be closed, and so on and so forth. These are small things, but they are essential. And of course, that the state will stay secular, which is also a crucial thing.
I believe the madam there in the 7th row had a question.
How is this? Okay. My name is Adelina Marini. I'm from EU Inside, and my question is on Russia again. The EU had a dialogue with Russia. There were these regular EU-Russia summits. There was a cooperation council within NATO. All these were suspended due to the annexation of Crimea. So there are attempts for a dialogue with Russia for the resolution of the Syrian conflict and for keeping the Iran deal alive. But all this seems to be failing. So why do you think, what changes? Why do you think that a new dialogue with Russia would help, especially given what you said, Mr. Morel, it's a question to you, that this dialogue should be focused on trade, or trade should be part of it? Since there are sanctions imposed on Russia, does this mean that these sanctions should be cancelled? Thank you.
Mr. Morel?
Yes, well, after 4 years of sanctions, I think, according to a great number of studies, sanctions have had an important impact, and therefore I think there's now readiness to and willingness on maybe on the side of Russia to start a new kind of a dialogue to be able to get sanctions lifted, not immediately, but at least gradually, depending on the move on some other issues, and in particular Donbass. On the side of several member states as well, including in this country, that pushing for sanctions to be lifted, because it has also a price in economic terms, certainly, quite heavy, including in Poland, by the way, quite heavy. Also in the field of energy. It's not only trade, but Russia needs investments for the north, that they don't have technology. In 2000, there was an agreement made whereby Russia would guarantee investments, mainly from EU companies, against delivery of oil in a safe and manner. That could be revived. So there are a great number of these issues that, after 4 years of sanctions, we cannot continue just like that. We cannot. In particular, in a country like Russia that can do its best to maintain pressure to avoid by all means that sanctions would not maybe have all the consequences that it could, etc., and can control media and the rest of it. So it could continue maybe for another couple of years, but come on, one should really consider other possibilities.
Okay, can I actually get your thought about this, Daniela, as well? Because Moldova is stuck between the EU and Russia. How should the EU relate to Russia sanctions? Should they be dropped? Should there be a new dialogue between Brussels and Moscow?
We also at the moment have a very difficult dialogue, and like it's at the lowest of the possible in a way period of time with Russia. And now, like after the last meeting of our minister and Minister Lavrov, it was agreed not to get worse. And like it's also to see what's possible to be done at this level, and also to see where it's possible to cooperate and to have, like, to increase dialogue. Generally, like, I believe that it's important to have dialogue, but also it's very important to see where it doesn't work, like to really say and to have a strong, in a way, also voice and say, even we're a small state, and it's difficult also to put in the same, in a way, balance, and also to be treated with respect and with the respect of the international law and all these, in a way, elements. When referring to the dialogue of EU and Russia, we also believe that it's important also to be discussed the issues of our neighborhood too, and we believe that it's important EU also to have like, it's difficult to say, but like also like as a support, and also like looking in a broad, in a way, context. If we refer to the settlement of the Transnistrian conflict, where EU is observer, like it's very important, like also to back up this, in a way, process. We believe that with joint will from all the sides, the Transnistrian conflict is the easiest to be solved. Even it's very complicated, and even it's many ingredients into that. This is why we've been for a while also discussing that maybe this is the time when we could, in a way, try also as an example where the cooperation could be, in a way, done. But it's more complicated. I don't think it's now also the right time also to do it, because indeed different other steps should be in place in order to be ready to discuss more into details on this. Regarding the big, in a way, issue of the sanctions, we are very much aligning to the EU position on that, and also for us it's important also the process in the region, and we all know that they are very much linked with the progress on the Minsk, in a way, like process, and like the discussions and the evolutions in the Ukraine. This is why we'll very much follow this, and I think it's important to see progress from Russia's side on that part.
Do we have any more questions from the audience here, or shall we? Yes, gentleman there, and then we go to the gentleman in the front.
Hello, my name is Ronnie. I'm just a counselor at the Embassy of Egypt. Really, I thank you for this presentation, especially about the EMP. Just my question is that the EMP is just about, as you said, more for more, and that is tailor-made, and it just changed, especially after 2011, after the revolution that happened in the southern countries. My question is, what you think about the future of the EMP with all the southern countries for the next 5 years, especially that there was like a kind of ideas about the Cotonou Agreement and the financial instrument that is used in the EMP that can be included in it. So that was the reason of the question. Thank you.
To Mr. Mirel, or to... Who do you address your question to?
Sorry?
Who do you want to answer your question?
Yeah, to Mr. Pierre.
Mr. Mirel.
All right, well, maybe a good example is Tunisia, again. Following what has happened over the past years, I think the EU is not doing what it should in Tunisia. Tunisia has a huge public debt
Yeah.
that is really an impediment on development for investing in youth, in particular in the southern part of Tunisia. And I think the EU has no power on that because the debt is mainly public from some member states or private with some banks, but at least it could take the lead, as it did with, if I'm not mistaken, Hungary and Poland back in the 90s, to help at just cancelling part of the debt of Tunisia, which would be a big relief for the country to invest more in. So this is what I think the EU should do: a much more intense financial assistance, along with the, I think, interesting ideas which have been agreed with the government recently about the young people in Tunisia, developing some vocational schools and etc. But money is needed behind it, and I think this is what it should do.
Okay, we have another question from the front here. Do we have a microphone? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Vitaly Rus. I'm ambassador of the Republic of Moldova to the Czech Republic. My question goes to Mr. Mirel. He mentioned in his interventions about the need, one of the priority need to begin re-establish confidence with Russia. So it sounds like there is at least part of culpability for losing confidence on our sides. I mean, those countries that are concerned, those three countries with the CFTA and the European Union policy in the region. So confidence, as to my understanding, was lost long before the Crimea. You all remember the 2008 war in Caucasus, de facto seizing some territory of Georgia, then followed Crimea, Ukraine. There is an unlawful presence of military forces of Russian Federation in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova, so without a host country consent. So I would ask some, let's say, more to be more elaborate or specifics in what aspects we were wrong, so that we need to push forward with re-establishing confidence with Russia from our side. Thank you.
So the question is, in what way did we, as the European Union, did wrong?
European Union and those three countries concerned that are implementing this FTA and at the same time facing security problems, huge security problems with Russia.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, what did the EU and also the three associated countries in the East do wrong to warrant a dialogue with Russia when it seems like it's Russia who's actually done all the trespassing, all the political trespassing, all the violence, all the aggression in the East?
How long do we have?
I'll give you 5 minutes.
No,
If you can answer.
I think at this stage, after 4 years of sanctions, for whatever happened and who is guilty, who did what, and etc., one should not look at that much. One should really try in a very discreet manner, not through big publicity and etc. and conferences, but in a discreet manner start, and actually this is what's happening, I think, to open a dialogue. But there are a certain number of issues that nevertheless should be discussed. For instance, the Dutch aircraft that was destroyed. I mean, that's an issue that cannot be avoided in such a dialogue. So there are issues where I think it would not be that difficult to find an agreement, mainly trade, even energy. But there are other issues that need to be part of the dialogue. So we should not be naive I'm not naive in pleading for such a dialogue, actually. But I think one has to start and not to, go again at saying, well, you did this, you did that, with the exception of certain number of issues where clearly the blame can be made on certain groups.
Let's move to the Slido questions for a while. There's one here that I think sort of fits you, Sonja.
Yeah.
What if countries in the neighborhood want to be what you want them to be? Do you think that's a good idea? What if countries in the European neighborhood want to be what you want them to? Meaning, in other words, should the EU perhaps push and say, well, sorry, but you need to do this. We should just not accept you, say, oh, you need to do this, you need to X, you need to do Y.
In fact, after the wars and after the complete destroyment of this fiber of these societies, these countries really do need support, do need also, I would say, the efforts of democratic communities in the world to help them to rebuild themselves in the sense that they will become normal democratic countries. They need this, and it will not come from the blue skies because the wounds of the wars are still very deep, and people have serious problems to establish themselves and to put in place functioning institutions and so on. So from this sense, I think it is very useful that they had for such a long period of time this perspective. Coming to European Union, it means also to keep up democratic standards, to establish institutions, to comply with I would say, the rules that are normal rules of the European Union. This was very, very useful, and it's still useful. But my point is not here. My point is that this is not enough. That people are really thinking about how to get jobs, how to get the possibilities to have normal services that they are necessary. And here, you said before, this was not the rule of the European Union, this was the rule or these were the rules which were made by IMF and World Bank, etc. This is true. But also in the rules of the European Union, there are conditionalities, how the economy should work. And when you put these conditionalities on a ruined economy, what you get is totally impoverished working force, totally impoverished welfare state. And this is what is not very, giving very much hope to the people that they can live like that.
Would you then agree that maybe the mistake was for the EU not to have embarked into a major, we always use the same word, Marshall Plan, after the war?
Yeah.
There was a plan, but mainly to rebuild bridges that had been destroyed,
energy.
Okay. But that was not the plan that the region needed, I think.
I'm sorry that this happened like that. I just read this publication you gave us for the seminar, how Ireland was joining European Union, and in the pre-accession times there was such a big injection of support to Ireland that a very poor and underdeveloped countries was all of a sudden one of the 3 most developed countries of the European Union. So it is possible. This part of the world is not a big part. What, this Balkan altogether, it's a drop in the ocean in comparison with the huge European Union.
This is why one should not consider unimportant what happened in Sofia on the 17th of May. I think there was an agreement to increase the funding to Western Balkans, but also an interesting point, or 2 points actually. One, to make a link between the reforms, and in particular fundamental reforms, rule of law, etc., and financial assistance. In other words, the old more for more that was used with the neighbourhood policy that did not really work, but obviously should work with countries aspiring to become members and having the possibility to negotiate accessions. And the second thing is a mechanism that would, after accession, after accession, would ensure that new members would, or at least a mechanism that would reduce the risk of threats of breach of EU values, principles, etc. And that's an important point, because most countries in the Western Balkans these days are quite authoritarian regime and don't care very much.
Daniela, you wanted to jump in on this as well.
Yeah, I would like to make a few points in order to answer the question about if we should in a way do what the EU requires. First of all, the first point is as long as we accept it, as long as it's requested from our side. And I think this is what Eastern Partnership also allows, to take at its own, in a way, will of the countries to enter in the dialogue as the level they are interested to. And that's why also not all the 6 partners from Eastern Partnership, they have association agreement of the DCFTA. They also agreed at different level. And in our situation, it really proved that stick and carrot works. When it's very clear, and also when it's backed up with, for the visa liberalization is the most visible example, the tremendous work and reforms that were implemented for a very clear goal. And we have very important examples, for example, it took us 4 years to have the anti-discrimination law. And we had protests, we had the law was several times taken out from the parliament and again introduced. And now we have more than 6 years while the law is implemented, and there are no issues and problems at all with the law. It's even now proved, from the last report of the Anti-Discrimination Council, that the main, in a way, issues that they're dealing with, they are women, disabilities, and social inequalities. And sometimes it's very important about this, not menu à la carte, but also to understand that from some certain reforms, it's very important to be taken as a whole picture with all the ingredients together. But at the same time, I think it's important about this conditionality to be proportional and to be realistic and to be possible and measurable. It's a very famous quotation of Einstein. It says something like that: if you measure the capacity of the fish by its capacity to climb a tree, it will die frustrated. This is why it's very important to really adjust, and as it was said, to adjust to the reality of the countries and to different in a way, really to be tailor-shaped. And even many of the processes that were now also implemented, they are inspired from the process of accession of the central, in a way, European countries, now also transferred to the Western Balkans and to us. Not all the mechanisms are really working, because still the realities of all our countries are a bit different. This is why it's very important to really adjust. In the same time, also understand how difficult it is for EU to really tailor-shaped for all of us, very different in a way instruments. And I don't know what's the best in a way recipe and how to do it, but definitely it's a need for this. And in case of the Republic of Moldova, when we're talking about Eastern Partnership, the world is partnership. And I think we should not forget about that. And the power of it, and also the potential and what should in a way exactly be. And we have in Moldova saying that the friend is appreciated more, it's one in need. Exactly, you need this partnership when the situation is very difficult. Because when the situation goes smooth in all the ways, usually you forget about all this, you're looking in a different in a way. And this is why it's very important to build on this in a way partnership, especially for the countries which majority of us from Eastern Partnership are in a different and a difficult situation, and we count a lot on the partnership, and still it's a lot of untapped potential into that.
Daniela, there was a question that was directly to you about Gaugasia. I wonder if the Slido guys can bring it forward again. It was about association agreement in Gaugasia. Can we get it to this screen again, maybe? Because I didn't manage to note down the whole thing, because it was directed directly at you from Moldova.
I couldn't understand the question.
It was a question about Gaugasia, which is a... So it's good that we have a former commissioner coming to us saying... It was about the positive effects of the association agreement So do you see any improvements in the economic perspective of Gaugasia? Does it contribute for the association?
The association agreement is for the entire country. And we're looking at this for the entire country, including the Transnistrian region. And we're trying to see how all the economic actors could do trade with the EU, how they could in a way improve. The Gagauzian region now are implementing many projects, EU-funded projects also in the region, and also the Bashkan of the Gagauzian region, it's part of Governmental Committee for European Integration. This is the highest body for coordination of all the EU issues. It's chaired by the Prime Minister that includes all the heads of ministries, agencies and bodies that they have any responsibility under association agreement. They are very much part of the process. It's still a lot from our side to do for the communication because first of all everything gets technical and sectorial and it's difficult for us still to do that. And we did also some communication mistakes in the past, and also we used to communicate about EU only to the ones in favor. We didn't communicate to the ones skeptical ones. And here we need different messages, different tools, and also different elements into that. And even to speak about European Union in Gagauz. And this is the challenge. For example, I don't have anyone in my team, in the ministry, that could be fluent in Gagauz and also know all the small details about the European integration. And this is one of the challenges, and this is one of the, I think, natural step. If we want to have them on board more, we should do more of this type of actions. But definitely, like to answer the question, it's improve. Like we have improvements and we have good in a way, but still, the room it's like for improvement. It's still bigger ahead of us.
Let's deal with Hamza's question here. How to deal with the influence of external actors who sometimes hinder the EU's intention in this region? We have heard Mr. Morel talk about dialogue. Sonja, what's your take on it? How to deal with these external actors who obviously don't have the same goals as the EU sometimes?
I think that it is very important to encourage the people who are leading these countries to come up with Balkan countries, for example, to come up with their own ideas, what they need the most and how they want to develop it, and give them the opportunity to really do that. Because if they find development perspectives with European Union, which are bigger and quicker than the ones offered by the other competitors for their attention, then I don't think that we will have a big issue here. But if nothing is moving, they cannot really propose what they need the most, and then the others will come and say, oh, we will finance this or that, and then it's clear what the people will do. They will not feel obliged to stay loyal to the European Union.
In order to answer the question, like how to, in a way, deal with the influence of some, in a way, external actors, I think the only answer is to build resilience and to build strong institutions back home. And this is maybe the most difficult, but I think the most sure for the long run for the country. And here we will need a lot of guidance, expertise, support from EU side in building all of this. We're a pilot country for hybrid threats, dealing with this, and we're trying to learn how exactly we can in a way work on this and what we can do together with EU, with member states, in order to build resilience. And it's really complex, especially in this century, like what also hybrid things, and we're so vulnerable in so many ways, and this is why it's sometimes easier for external actors to have influence on some of the elements which by itself, directly or indirectly, could affect the speed, the process, the intensity of the process, or EU integration in our country or entire region.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should not see also some countries only a sort of victim of influence of Russia.
No.
I mean, some countries like Serbia, clearly the president is using Serbia for other purposes, and in particular the debate on Kosovo. So it's not just, it's part of a wider and longer perspective. But second point, to reduce the influence of external actors, I think it starts in the EU itself. If you have a country like Hungary, if I'm not mistaken, that agree with Russia on some investments without following the competition rules, there's an issue, right? Yeah. So one should make sure in the first place that EU member states fully respect EU competition and state aid rules when dealing with EU companies or any external, whether Russian or American.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we have about 7 minutes left. Are there any more questions from the audience? Madame's third question.
Thank you again. I just would like to go across the Great Pond and ask about the role of the US in that whole discussion of EU, Russia, and it seems to me that EU could be in between the US or Russia, or it could be actually leading a new kind of relationship between the three powers, because it's no longer a bipolar world, and hopefully it won't be again. So I'm wondering, how do you see the development of US-EU relations at the event of EU reopening dialogue with Russia?
And who do you want to answer your question?
Well, it's towards all of the panelists, but predominantly, again, Mr. Mirel, I'm sorry for that, but that's towards you. And thank you in advance.
So,
Daniela experienced that already.
Daniela, perhaps you're the one in power at the moment. So the rocky relationship across the Atlantic right now, do you feel that in Moldova? And then we go to our EU citizens on the panel.
For us, the relations with US are also very important, and we're trying to build. I think US can be more active and more present also in the region, especially very supportive for, again, Transnistrian conflict and this. But now, it can be more in terms of cooperation and potential. In terms of EU and US, it looks very complicated, and I think now appearing more and more subjects on the bilateral EU-US to be settled. I don't know where is Moldova in terms of big list of issues on the agenda. We believe in the power if there's going to be an agreement EU-US and also to be touched on the same way, on the same page with Russia, for example, for the settlement. We believe that it can be possible as a set case of cooperation where it could in a way improve. But I don't know if we are on realistic terms of that, if it's just wishful thinking and on this practical. And from what we're following from Twitter and all that, it looks complicated. And we would like to learn maybe more from the EU side, how are there in a way steps how to overcome this in a way reality, and also then to have the possibility to discuss other issues of interest also of our neighborhood, not only purely bilateral in a way relations.
So Sonja and Pierre, the troubled transatlantic relationship, what sort of impact did that have on the neighborhood policy?
I'm always thinking about these things. I'm an old person, and I was living...
Not at all.
Oh, yes. And I was living in Yugoslavia when it was a leader of the non-alignment movement. And the success of this movement was that it really, I think it really helped the two superpowers not to start a real nuclear war or to be in constant, very tense relationship. Because the small countries always suffer, like when the elephants make love, the grass suffers. So I'm sure that the interest of the world is that we have a sort of detente. So whatever Europe can do to make this situation, which is tense and unpleasant and really makes us feel chilly, like the war is around the corner, we would like to change this. And my impression is that European Union has some maneuvering space to start something like this, to open up for such a discussion. I'm sure people of the world would be very, very how we say, grateful for such a move.
Yeah.
I'm not anymore in activity, so I'm afraid I'm not in a position to say very concrete things. What I'm hearing from the region, from the Balkans, is that the US are much less present in terms of, discussing, pushing, asking, etc. Much less present.
We have the question that I've most liked here, actually. I'd take, Pierre, you for that one. Would it be right to support creating of a peaceful and stable ring surrounding EU, even at the cost of authoritarian regimes violating human rights?
But again, that comes to the question I was mentioning before. Let's take the example of Egypt. What do? We say, you're not respecting democracy at all. You're putting so many people in jail with no reason, no prosecution, etc. And therefore, we're not going to deal with you anymore? You cannot ignore a country like Egypt. So I'm sorry, we have to continue dealing with this country. But again, it does not mean that we have to hide values and etc. And the best thing to do in these circumstances, with Egypt and other countries, is again to invest and make at least some programs accepted with civil society, with women and young people. This is the minimum that can be done. I don't see any other possibility. We cannot ignore this country.
Okay, we've almost come to the end now. It's almost 5 o'clock. Normally, I should be the one as the host to sum up everything here, but I don't think people are really that interested in listening to me. So I will do it differently here now. Next year, we will have a new European Commissioner for Neighbourhood and Enlargement. And I'm planning now, when I return to Brussels, to lobby to become his head of cabinet. And I want you three, very quickly, to give me the 3 things when it comes to the European neighbourhood that will convince him or her to hire me. So what are the 3 things I should say to get the job when it comes to reforming the European neighbourhood policy? Sexy now, short, concrete. Daniela, what shall I tell my prospective boss?
First of all, I would like to see that in the next commission will be a commissioner for neighborhood. Because as now I try to understand the discussion for the future financial, framework, more likely I will be absorbed by these global, instruments. And the logic says that, if you don't have an instrument, then you have a team, and I don't know if it's going to be a commissioner. We would like, first of all, to see that in the next, neighborhood will be a dedicated team and a dedicated commission to work with us. Because just to follow the High Representative didn't manage to travel to Moldova during her mandate, and it's still a question if she will manage during this. And I think it's very important that the next commission to keep very high on the agenda the neighborhood and the Eastern Partnership. I think this is the first thing in a way to say. The second is the importance of staying committed in terms of political dialogue, but also to be very much interlinked with sectorial, with substance and assistance. These are the 3 ingredients that we would like to hear from the Commission side for us. I don't know if these are the answers for hiring, because still it's to be discussed and to be seen inside the Commission. I think to be in a way hard, one word can be implementation and reforms, and definitely the EU side will resonate with this more.
Okay, so Sonja, I heard here now implementation and reforms, I heard assistance, I heard the fact that there should be an enlargement commissioner and it should be high up on the agenda. Please give me some more things that the next neighbourhood commissioner should think about.
I think that one sentence you said is a very good sentence. You cannot work with the countries you wish them to be, but how they are. But how they are is not only the people who are in charge in any country, who are politicians of the highest level. There are people who are working in civil society and who have a lot to offer in order to get to the reforms quicker than we did up till now. So if we support these people, especially young people and women, we might move the agenda of the Balkan neighborhood much faster.
So basically look beyond the prime ministers, presidents,
Exactly.
foreign ministers, and to the civil society. Civil society focus.
Civil society, people who really are working for their community, not trying to earn money, but to change the country.
Mr. Mirel, give me some
My
hints.
first recommendation would be keep a language of truth and do not make promises that the EU will not be able to honor. Second, make sure that action plans or whatever they are not accepted to please you or on the eve of an election or council association meeting, but are tailor-made, can be acceptable, and can be useful for the country. And third is the same as Sonja, civil society. No, sorry, the point that has not been mentioned. I mean, make sure that you visit the external actors in a discreet manner as many times as possible to start, if it has not started yet, to help on the dialogue to be either open or continued.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending. Please give a round of applause for Mr. Mirel, Madame Lokar, Madame Morar. Thank you.
Thank you.